but it looks as if they're sort of thinking that maybe Turkey should play the bigger role and Israel should play less of a role. I think there is a considerable disillusion with Netanyahu now in circles, not in, not across the board in the United States, of course not. The evangelicals and everyone will not change. But I think in many circles, there's a disillusionment. Netanyahu's got this wrong. He gave the United States false intelligence. He claimed, all sorts of things, that Iran would fold like a pack of cards, that the Kurds were waiting to sort of invade and establish a state, Kermanshah, and so on. And so there's a disillusion. And so there's a questioning, well, maybe we should be turning our attention, they're not going to abandon Israel. I'm not for a moment suggesting that. But maybe, Netanyahu, who's in crisis, political crisis in Israel, he's having difficulties there. Maybe they would be, not mind too much if he disappears and another pro-American proxy is elected in his place. But meanwhile, they're looking at managing the region in a rather different way. And that's why we see, these extraordinary and rather distasteful sights of former ISIS people being handshaken by Trump and offered to have all their sanctions relieved on them. And the sort of idea that Turkey, together with Syria, can manage Lebanon, because as the Americans are saying, and as Trump is saying, well, Netanyahu hasn't done this very well. I mean, he's just killing too many people. He's attacking Beirut and he's devastating the ground. And this is not being very helpful. When he says it's not being very helpful, he doesn't care about the people, but he cares about the image. And it's damaging America's image as much as it's damaging Israel's image. So he's thinking, that maybe Sharia can somehow either sort of politically do deals with Hezbollah or something of the sort. But anyone who's lived in the region will know, the relationship between ISIS and the Salafists and the Muslim Brotherhood, let alone the Shia and Alawites, has been absolute one of, a death war between the two sides. It's not something that can be, I think, used. So often I've seen in all my years in the region, the West thinking that Salafists are rather simple people, that, they're not very good at politics, but they're very, they sort of pious people, and we can use them for the Western purposes, only to find that those people have used the West for their purposes. They've actually done the opposite, and they've used the West more than the West has been able to use them. So I don't think it's likely to come to it, but I think we're going to see a new forms of pressure coming. And then there's Iraq and the effort there to get, I don't know if it's still on the cards, but I think the new prime minister is due to go to the White House. I thought it was this week, but maybe it's been postponed with the funeral and other matters. But it's obviously, he has been currying favor with the White House, with the Americans. And he's now set 30th of September as the deadline for the Iraqi resistance, the Hashad, to disarm and come into the system. Again, another part of the sort of, the pieces that I think the Americans are trying to shape in a different way to put pressure on Iran, because they feel that the sort of, the chainsaw of Israel just going around the region, with its chainsaw cutting everything and everybody down, has not been really very effective.
Yeah. The report from yesterday is that the shipping activity through the Strait of Hormuz has fallen sharply, with only 22 verified transit logged on yesterday. And Alastair, when it comes to the NATO summit, one of the main focus of Donald Trump and his administration was the case of, as you've mentioned, Syria and Turkey. It seems to me that the United States somehow understands the shift or the changes that are happening in the West Asia. Because right now you see, despite having tremendous pressure from Israeli lobby and Benjamin Netanyahu, they're talking about F-35, and the United States giving F-35 to Turkey. And it was reported that Turkey is transferring S-400 that they bought from Russia to the Gulf states in order to make some sort of adjustments in Turkey to receive these fighter jets. But when it comes when it comes to the vision of Washington geopolitically in the West Asia, and considering the new conflicts, the Israeli understanding is we have right now two main enemies. One of them is the Muslim Brotherhood, and the other one is the Shia.
Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other is Turkey, not so much the Shia. No, if you listen to the Israeli discourse, it is, the awful Muslim Brotherhood, which they connect with Turkey, but the Muslim Brotherhood as such, and then Turkey are the two real. I mean, obviously, this is a message narrative aimed at Washington to say, don't sell them F-35s. I mean, I want to move on from this discussion in the sense because, first of all, I don't think F-35s are particularly good aircraft. Don't think they're even stealthy now. I mean, it's quite clear Iran has radar systems, infrared radar systems that can expose stealth aircraft, including F-35s, and I'm sure other countries have them too. And also, I have no evidence whatsoever, but I just don't really believe that story that Turkey is selling Russia's S-400s to Gulf states. It may be true, but I would think Russia would be furious at that. S-400s are still highly, classified and still are very effective defense systems. They don't toss them around lightly, Russia. Erdogan is a chameleon. You never know what he stands for, what he's doing, but he's always been very clever at playing a relationship with Putin. You've seen it time and time again. Even people in Russia sometimes say, it's surprising. Why is Putin spending so much time with Turkey? Because everyone knows Erdogan, you can't trust a word he says. So I don't know about that. But I would say, this is the wrong measurement yardsticks to look at what's happening now. Everything really depends on something else, and that is the shortage of, if you like, sour crude from this region and from other regions reaching refineries in the America and in Europe. Sour crude is the distillate that provides for both diesel and kerosene, and it is acutely short in America, acutely short. They're talking about that if you look at it in all the stocks, there's about 8 or 9 days supply left. And so this is why he gambled that he could, do a trick and get Hormuz open during the funeral ceremonies. But now it's becoming a crisis. So what are the timelines to this? I think a little bit of sort of tit for tat conflict will continue. They'll continue. Iran will continue. Any ships? I don't think many ships or vessels will volunteer to try and run the corridor on behalf of the United States. But when they talk to their insurance companies back in at home, who will tell them, "We're very sorry, but we don't accept this behavior. If you do this, we're not going to insure you." And so, the insurance is a key aspect. And so I think that how long can this go on for? Well, I think the answer is, a couple of weeks, but then there are two constraints. I think one constraint is how long. I mean, they've virtually emptied the strategic reserve, trying to get this in. But you know what happens to societies when the diesel stops being delivered, or when the kerosene stops, then planes don't fly. And this is one of the reasons I don't think there'll be, Iran war full out at the moment, because wars that the Americans mount require a lot of flying. Tankers, air tankers, aircraft coming from the United States, staging through the UK, all that burns kerosene so fast. I'm not sure that they really have reserves or would be willing to use those reserves now. And so I think that the Pentagon and others will be saying to Trump, we don't have the wherewithal, quite apart from air defenses. We don't have the fuel to run a major war. Major wars take endless fuel, aviation fuel. So I don't know. I mean, as I say, we're not told how many, but I think it's very short. And I think that's the timeline that is affecting Trump, and why one of the reasons is he wants to shift to Russia, and we saw at NATO, Ukraine coming back into the thing. Oh, Ukraine, Russia isn't really doing so well. Ukraine is doing much better than people had thought, and if only we keep sending, missiles deep into Russia to frighten the Russian population, to unsettle them and make them turn away from Putin, then we've got pressure and Putin will have to come to a ceasefire. Well, I think it reflects a misunderstanding of Russians as much as they've misunderstood Iran in the same sort of way. The Russians are not simply going to sit and allow, missiles to be fired directly into their populations, their rear populations, for long. At some point, they'll react, and that's going to be very dangerous. But that's where I think we're looking at the process, and I think China too is getting very much fed up with the situation, and this is an opportunity for Iran. China is a very cautious, very careful state, but it could help a lot in trying to advise and devise a sort of a new economic framework for Iran, and to help underpin it, not in the sort of Western sense of just investments in data centers and so on, but in a sense of going back to real economy, an economy that actually provides what people need, ordinary people need, and serves their needs. And it's not about the international market, not about the export market. It's about getting the ordinary economy going. I used to say this all the time in Afghanistan when I was there, on the borders of Afghanistan, where I was then. They'd say, what are we going to do about Afghanistan? And I said, the best thing you could do probably would be to ship in a whole series of shovels and picks and seeds, so that people can actually start farming again. This is what matters to people, not just, simply, exporting tulips to Europe.
Yeah. Donald, when it comes to Syria and what Donald Trump is trying to do with the government there, with al-Shara, al-Jolani, these people in Syria, basically, because on one side, when you ask this government in Syria to do something for you in Lebanon, you have to see the capabilities of the government, domestically and physically, the forces they have, because many of these HTS or ISIS forces that were in Syria, somehow Turkey has managed to send them to the Sahel. They're not there anymore. So, in order to reduce the tensions within the Syrian government. And then the United States is talking about using al-Shara al-Jolani to do something in Lebanon. Even the United
Look,
States said we're going to send troops to Lebanon. What is your understanding of sending American?
this is fantasy stuff. We shouldn't be taking it at all seriously. As you know, I've lived in Lebanon for 9 years, and when we talk about the government, it is not the whole government. It is a faction of the Beirut government that signed that document, a document which has no legal validation. It contradicts the Lebanese constitution. It would need to go to cabinet first of all. The cabinet, the structure, the type structure is that no two sects can outvote the third. So you have to have more than, if you like, 2/3 majority to take something through cabinet, which is probably not there. And then it would have to go to parliament, where they would not have a majority. So it has no valid basis. And if you look at the army in Lebanon, 40% are Shia. I mean, they are not going to, and, it's a society where there's families are complex, and you have Sunnis and Shia in one family in Lebanon. And, they're not going to go and kill the Shia for America. The army is not going to do that, or for Israel, even less so. So I think I just don't think this is going to be a workable proposition. And to have it run by ISIS, who is pledged to kill all and is killing, Alawites and Shia and Sunnis who will not accept them, and everyone that, is in danger. I mean, they regard any source of, if you like, non-compliance with the very rigid Hijaz, Saudi Arabian type of interpretation of the Prophet and of the Bible, that the Quran is somehow to be killed. I mean, I don't think this is going to work at all. But I think the most important element in this is Turkey. I mean, Erdogan, no one trusts him. He's a sly fox. He has his ambitions. Yes, he's trying to increase, he has Ottoman-esque ambitions in the region. He'd like to have a bigger presence, taken more seriously. He still resents the fact that, the European Union, and particularly the French, refused to have him join the European Union because they said Turkey is too different. And so, I mean, he would like to be more in the center and accepted. After all, he's been through a period, of, under a cloud with what happened with Khashoggi and all of this in the world opinion. Of course, Saudi Arabia too, but it happened in Turkey. So I think that we shouldn't read too much into this. I think Turkey will pursue its own interests, essentially. it will play the Americans along. Of course, it'll go to Washington. Erdogan is adept at saying the right things, whether it's to Putin or to Trump. He will say the right things. It'll appear that he's going along with it, but everything will be focused on that. And of course, I mean, it is a Muslim Brotherhood country in many ways, anathema to Israel and to part of the American establishment. I mean, Muslim Brotherhood has become a sort of a taunt, a sort of term of abuse in America. To call someone a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, they don't have no idea what the Muslim Brotherhood even is, but nonetheless, this is the language of today. So I just don't think we should read too much into it. But yes, maneuverings are going on. But what does it reflect? It reflects essentially defeat. Don't forget, I mean, why are we seeing this maneuvering taking place? Is because Israel has been completely defeated in its objectives in Iran. It is a major strategic defeat, and it can't go back to it. It knows it's over. They're not going to be able to just continue as they were before with trying to destroy Iran. And it was also, Iran has been a defeat for America, clear defeat. America has shown itself to lack, the military capabilities and to lack, if you like, the strategic thinking about Iran. I mean, completely lacking an understanding and therefore to construct a strategic plan or idea about Iran. So, I mean, this is a context. This isn't a vital new plan for the region. It's actually a fallback. You've got to say something, we've got to have a plan of some sort, support for Israel. We can't just leave Israel with no support. But why don't we look a little bit at Turkey and see if we can't do something with Turkey and with Syria and, try and put pressure on Iran this way. Iran will be frightened of the idea of Sharia. I mean, coming in. Look, Hezbollah has been fighting these people in the north for a long time. They know how to deal with these, and they know exactly who they are. So I don't think I may be wrong, but I don't think it's going to turn out. I think this is, plan B. And it's not a very good plan B. But when your plan A collapses, you've got to embrace something, even if it doesn't make much sense. So you see all these sort of plan Bs. I saw in the Israeli press, articles saying, well, oh, Iran is terrified that it's going to lose control of Hormuz because we're going to implement the IMEC corridor, the India, Middle East, through Israel corridor to Europe. This is fantasy. I mean, IMEC has been dead for some time. I mean, first of all, no one is going to allow it because the end of the IMEC corridor is Haifa and in Israel, and it's going to pass through Israel. And at the moment, it was the UAE, and Saudi isn't going to allow the UAE to play a part. The usual regional bickering. So but we're getting all of that, but it just reflects the fact that we shouldn't lose sight of that Israel was defeated in a way in which cannot be undone and restored. And America has experienced a major setback in its standing and in the people's understanding of its military capabilities. It had been seen as, unstoppable. And now it is seen that its military capabilities have apparently been overrated over these years.
When it comes to the region and the situation with Israel, you've just mentioned what has happened, but considering what it was, in before 2023, October 7th, what has happened in that day, The Israelis were on the path of normalizing the relationship with Turkey, with Arab states altogether. They're somehow ignoring the fact the Palestinian state and the people in Palestine. But that has changed drastically. And today, as Bild in Germany reported, that the Qatari investors are blocking Volkswagen's proposed partnership with Israel's Rafael to manufacture components for Iron Dome, because they have bought something like 10.4% stake in the Volkswagen. So they can say we're not going to do that, and they're putting pressure on the German manufacturer of cars, because they're somehow trying to help the military industrial complex in Israel. On the other hand, you see the increasing tensions between, as Financial Times reported yesterday, between Saudi Arabia and UAE, and the trade
Exactly.
is somehow slowing down. Is everything in each and every aspect you see the Israeli sort of dominance is falling apart in the region. I don't know
Yeah,
how
and
much is that appreciated by Netanyahu and his administration and people in Israel.
the Abraham Accords were basically a UAE project, and that's why Saudi Arabia would never let it go ahead. I don't think, even if you take 7th of October, I don't think there was a real threat that Saudi Arabia would join in it, because they saw it as a UAE flagship project and didn't want to give UAE any more sort of standing than it's already trying to obtain for itself. But I think Israel, at one level, is very much aware that it needs to rethink everything, that it has had, that the outcome of this war. They know, that America is never again going to go to war on their behalf with Iran.